Hello everyone, I'm Dr. Joel Vallett, and I'm on the faculty within the College of Humanities and Social Sciences within the Department of Political Science and Criminal Justice. I specifically teach in the Masters of Public Administration program, or the MPA program. And today I had the opportunity to talk to you about research methods and why research methods are something that you should look forward to, something that you can find important not only in your studies as a student, but as well as applicable into the work that you will do in your future careers. Now, before I move forward, I want to take some time to explain why research methods is important, why it's going to be valuable to you. But as I do that, let me tell you a little bit about the explanation or the faces I usually get when I talk about research methods with my graduate students. Now, when I say research methods to my graduate students, I get one of two type of responses. The first is they blank out and they think scary math. They think of big equations like the one I have over here. And they get really concerned that they can't do this type of work. But it's more than that. Now, my second group of students, they start thinking about the library when they hear research methods and all the time that they have to spend in the library, pouring through books, looking at all the other different authors and the various topics that are out there. And as they do that, they start getting panicked. Do they have the time to do a research methods class? Well, I'm here to tell you today that research methods is more than just heavy math and a lot of time in the library. Instead, research methods is an opportunity for you to do something that you already do as part of your everyday life. That's asking questions and making arguments. So let's discuss this in a little more detail. Research methods, again, is something we do every day. And even in its most basic form, it's something that we understand. So let's define research methods. To define research methods, we have to look first at what is research? Research is the searching for and gathering of information. It's something, again, that we do every day. We're bombarded by questions, and we'll look at these in a little bit, the type of questions that you're facing. And it's something that we want to be able to recognize. And I'll discuss this a little bit more in detail later. But as we're looking for more information, it's how we learn and how we grow. It helps us to form our relationships. And in a lot of ways, the information that we gather determines the type of actions that we'll take moving forward. Now, having defined what research is, let's take a look at how we apply that to research methods. Research methods is taking that information and its strategies or processes that we've used to be able to analyze the information that we've gathered. We are constantly looking for patterns. We're constantly looking for themes in our lives to help define who we are and what's important to us. That's the basis of research methods. It's taking a systematic approach to be able to analyze those themes that are most important to us, most important to the people that we serve within our careers. Now, before I move into some of the details of research methods, let me explain why behind research methods, or why research methods, again, is important to you. Well, first, I already told you that research methods is something that you do on an everyday basis. Let me show you. We are constantly faced with questions, claims, and arguments in all different forms. Some of them are commercial in nature, such as which iPhone is the best, or which phone in general is the best. Should I go with a Samsung? Should I go with Google? We also like to look at arguments and claims made in the sports world, one that's particularly of importance to me. Which player is the best? Which team should I cheer for? And so we see a lot of claims circulating in these two areas, but we also see it in other areas, such as politics and government. And these are areas that I spend a lot of my time researching and focusing on. And it's important for us to be able to analyze these arguments in many different fields. So we see these arguments everywhere, even within the education system. Which school is the best? Which university should you go to? You should use this form of pedagogy because it results in the best learning outcomes. Every area of study or interest that you will involve yourself in revolves around the importance of making arguments or responding to the arguments of others. Now, how do we judge these claims or even make our own arguments? How do we not fall victim to bad or false claims that are sometimes made in the world we live in? Well, the answer? Through solid research and research methods. Now, beyond the headlines, we also make arguments or ask questions as part of our everyday life and a part of our everyday conversations. Not only do I try to convince others to take our side, but we sometimes try to convince ourselves of what side we should take. Some of these questions or arguments that we make is, where should I have lunch today? It's easy for me. I'm going to the student center for Chick-fil-A. Should I go to class? Hopefully you're spending a lot of time in class if you're able to make it. And then how much time should I spend on my homework? And I'm hoping you're dedicating as much time to your homework as you can. Now again, these are questions that we ask as part of our everyday life, but they're similar to the questions that we face in research methods. And they're things that we should become familiar with. Research methods helps us to do this. Within research methods, we learn how to make a logical argument and then support it with data and with evidence. So students ask me frequently, why take a research methods class? Why is that important? And my response is simple. Where better can we practice asking questions and living everyday life than in a research methods classroom? Within a research methods classroom, we have the opportunity to provide you with a safe environment where you can ask questions, you can begin to find the answers that you seek, you can defend and create arguments and make claims that maybe you're not so certain about. But as you work through them in a research methods course, you can find the answers you're looking for. Even if the answer may be something as simple as, what should I have for dinner, rice or pasta? Now that I've explained the why, let's get back into what research methods are available and how do we use them. Now within research methods, even within an academic research, we begin with a question with the intent of developing new knowledge or trying to figure out more about the world we live in or the problems that we're constantly faced with. Now these questions can span the spectrum of observations about the world, but personally, I teach and focus my students on what is called applied research. Research that can be used to solve practical problems. Problems that are relevant to the work that they're currently involved in or doing with their future careers. In the field of public administration, these questions look something like, how effective will this new policy be? What will happen to the program if we change certain objectives? And a lot of these questions are centered on what can be done or how can we improve a certain area. We see these questions in all other fields, specifically in the education section. We ask questions of, is this new program going to help my students? Are the test scores valid for my students? And by asking these questions, we begin to gain new understanding, new information. And now once we've answered these questions, we should be especially focused and be prepared to defend an argument. But how? How do we answer these important questions and structure our arguments? We collect evidence, and this is where we begin to select the research method that we will use to defend our argument. Now, how do we know what type of evidences or data that we need? Well, we want to collect the evidence or data that will help us best answer our question. This collection of evidence usually comes in one of two ways. First, we have quantitative collection or quantitative research methods, or we have qualitative collection, qualitative research methods. Now let me simplify these words a little bit because I can understand that they're a little confusing. Quantitative is the collection of data that will be analyzed using mathematical or statistical methods. We usually see this data collected with administrative records or various things such as the census, and they help us to be able to understand what's going on in the world through numbers. On the other hand, we also have qualitative methods. This is the collection and analysis of words, symbols, or artifacts that are largely non-statistical in nature. We usually see these in the forms of interviews, focus groups, or observations. Again, the purpose of both of these methods is to help us answer the questions that we may have. And to simplify it even further, quantitative is utilizing numbers. And so when I say quantitative research methods, I want you to think numbers. When I'm talking about qualitative research methods, I want you to think of stories. We're answering our questions through either analyzing numbers or looking at the individual stories or groups of stories. Now, let me share an example of my own research. A lot of times I try to look and start off with quantitative research. So one time I was looking at how a policy came to be. What were the factors that influenced that policy? And of course I started with the numbers. I looked at things such as unemployment, poverty, the population, the number of policy experts that were involved. And as I boiled down those numbers, I began to find that the reason this policy came into place was because of the role of one policy expert. Now I saw that this policy expert was important, but I didn't understand how they influenced the policy. So they answered half of my question. The policy came into place because of this expert, but I didn't understand why. And so I needed to dive into their story. So I went to this policy expert and I started to ask them questions and learn more about why they were motivated to put this policy in place. I talked to legislators or lawmakers and tried to figure out why they were motivated by this individual and her story and that policy that she was putting into place. And by combining those numbers and that story that I received from those individuals, I was able to come to a better understanding of why this policy came into place. Now, this type of research methods, combining both quantitative and qualitative, is quite common. And this is what we usually see to be able to get at a good answer within our research methods. Unfortunately, we can't rely on one by itself. And having both of them provides us with a greater, more nuanced response to the questions that we're asking. Now, whether we choose to perform qualitative or quantitative methods comes with various challenges associated with our methods and selections. Now, in the social sciences, we find this challenging particularly because we're dealing with people. Now, in the math and physics, those hard sciences, they don't have to worry about this as much. They can do their research without people. We don't have that luxury in the social sciences. And because of that, we have to consider what's important to the individual. We have to think about how our questions and our surveys or the research that we're doing may impact them. Now, our hope is that our research will benefit them and provide enrichment to their lives. And the best way to do this is to consider how we can respect the individual. The last thing we want is for one of our studies to harm someone. And so as we respect and think of others and what's important to them and answer these questions, and we care about their answers, we can do our quantitative or qualitative research in a way that is respectful and helpful. Again, if possible, we want our studies to benefit those with whom we're working with. And to be able to do that, we have to collect our data in a respectful manner. After our data has been collected in a respectful way, we can begin to analyze our data or evidence and make important contributions to our field of study. Now, how do we analyze our data? We can analyze our data in a lot of different ways. A lot of our analysis will depend on the type of data that we collected. Now, not to dive too deeply into the math or into the stats, let's talk about some of the ways that we can collect and look at our data. Now, analyzing data also falls on the line of quantitative and qualitative. So let's start off on that quantitative or that number form of analysis. We see this number form of analysis in a few different ways. The first way we start off is with descriptive statistics. Descriptive statistics are extremely important. They help us understand what the data is actually telling us. It helps us to look at things such as the average. What is the average test score? It helps us to look at things such as frequency. How frequently did someone get an A in our class? It also allows us to look at how well someone is doing when we look at a maximum, or how poorly someone may be doing when we look at the minimum. Beyond descriptive statistics, we also have analysis such as t-test or ANOVA. Now again, not to dive into too much detail, but these analyses or these systems and processes allow us to look at differences between groups. Does this program A help the reading comprehension of my students better than program B? If I put a test in place, is that better than previous tests that we've done? So with t-tests and ANOVA, we're looking at differences. Finally, another very common quantitative method, and the last one that I'll talk about, is called multivariate regression. Now don't get scared away with that big word. Really, with multivariate regression, all we're looking for is relationships. For example, how does income and employment, population impact the students' test scores? Or how does nationalism influence policies? Using this method, we're constantly looking at how factors are related or come together in the world that we live in. And that is the basis of our quantitative studies. Now moving to the qualitative side, again, those stories, we're looking at narrative. We want to know if there is a story. And we do that through coding. We find themes and patterns, those things that help us to group individuals together. We then build that onto a narrative. And that narrative is a story. We look for things such as characters. And in those characters, we want to know who the heroes are, who the villains are. We want to know if there's a plot. Did the plot change over time? Another type of analysis that we can do is discourse analysis. We can look at how the story was told. Was it shared through writing? Was it shared through music? Was it shared through oral presentation? All of those are important factors in understanding what's important to individuals, why it matters, and it helps us to answer questions. Using all of these techniques, we can then begin to draw conclusions about our questions and form well-defined arguments. So what does this look like? Once we've analyzed our data using our preferred statistical technique, we can begin to draw conclusions to our questions and begin to take a position for our argument. Remember, the purpose of research methods in the very beginning was to be able to ask a question and then defend a response to that question by preparing and strengthening a defendable argument. But this is all going to be dependent upon the type of data that we collect. Now, a conclusion is not simply a summary of the findings and the research conducted. Importantly, it's an opportunity for us to understand and to dive deeply into what's going on in the world around us. It allows us to share what's important to the audiences that we're trying to communicate to. The conclusion provides us with an opportunity and the potential to explore in depth and detail broader implications, as well as limitations to our finding. And I can tell you now, as you look at others' claims and arguments, if they don't provide their limitations within their study, there's something wrong. That's an important aspect when drawing conclusions. We want to understand, again, not only how this research is going to impact others, but we want to know where we could go wrong or how can we could improve our studies. How can this grow? And how can we develop it further? Now, do we continue, for example, with an education program? Do we move forward with putting in place a new policy? Those are the type of conclusions that we're looking for, is answering these questions. And this is instrumental to the work that we'll do in our careers, in understanding what action we need to take to support our argument. Now, as we share these findings with the decision makers, or as we share our findings to encourage others to support our argument, we have a couple of ways to do this. First, as my example shows here, we can take a hard approach and overwhelm people with numbers. Unfortunately, this does not usually go well. Instead, it intimidates, frightens, and paralyzes others from acting. However, if we take a second option, such as this one, and share the data through simple graphs or images, we can compel our arguments forward by speaking both to the mind and to the emotions. For example, I can use the complicated numeric chart to share how child abuse is increasing over time, and we expect to continue to see that increase change over time. Or I can get rid of the numbers and show them a simple graph like this and tell them again that child abuse continues to rise from year to year. Or finally, I can use this last example and show them through images that child abuse continues to rise each year. Now, which one speaks to you? That is what we have to consider in sharing our research methods. What is important to the audience? We must be clear when we share our findings and be intentional in our message that we're trying to communicate. We need, again, to consider our audience. Are they prepared to receive the numerical data from the complicated chart? Not usually, but they may be someone that needs to see it. Or would my audience be better understanding and looking at the chart? Maybe that's something to drive them to action when they see the effects of child abuse increasing each year. In other cases, it may be looking at the image and helping them to be able to understand that they can do more, that they can help an individual child. And then as child abuse cases continue to rise each year, there's opportunities for them to influence and impact the effect of a child. Now, data allows us to be able to share why this is happening, but communicating our research findings through various methods helps us to speak to those audiences and helping them to understand what is important to them. Now, finally, we need to recognize that research methods is a process for conducting research, and that it's a process that's refined over time. In a lot of cases, as we build our arguments, we may find that we need to take a change or another perspective or alternative, and that's acceptable. As we do this, we usually strengthen our message that we want to share when conducting our own research. We also should expect this in others. We want to be able to see that others have gone through this process, that they've worked not only through the data that's available to them, but they've understood the argument that they're making and whether it is supported. And as we continue to do this over time, and our results are consistent over time, we strengthen our argument. We can become more confident in the argument, and we ourselves can be more supportive of those things that we're finding. Now, I have an example that I want to share with you of good research methods being used in the workplace. Now, the Philadelphia Fire Department had a problem. They were doing everything they could to help reduce fires in their residential areas, or the areas where homes are at. Now, as part of their program, they were going to schools, starting at the kindergarten level, the very youngest level, and were teaching those students what they could do to prevent fires in their home. Now, beyond the education, they were also going to various areas and sharing smoke detectors, ways to prevent fires, and providing individuals with resources to be able to prevent fires. Now, doing both the education and sharing the resource of the smoke detectors, while effective, costs money and costs time, and can be extremely challenging. And like every government agency, they were always short on people and money. They also realized that in some of the areas where they were spending a lot of time teaching or handing out the smoke detectors, there was not a lot of risk of fires, and they could have been using their money as best as they could in a different way. So they started to ask an important question. Can we reduce our teaching and limit our fire detector programs to those areas in high risk and have a better opportunity to reduce a position and argue especially when determining how to allocate our resources? Now, having this good research question, the Philadelphia Fire Department got to work. They started collecting data. The first way they did this was by using a method called the Fire Vulnerability Index. Now, the fire department was able to classify those areas that were most at risk within the city. They were able to look at the demographics within the city or makeup in those areas and identify where they could identify potential risk. Using this data, the fire department found that 60% of the fires that occurred in the city occurred only within 20% of the city. So lots of fires, but they were only occurring in small parts of the city. So there are some really clear identifications with this. They wanted to be able to better focus their limited resources on those areas to be specific within even the exact neighborhood that should receive the education or the smoke detectors. Philadelphia Fire Department, after making this effort, can now make the argument that they're being more intentional in their efforts and using the taxpayers' dollars in a more effective way. And this is a fabulous example of research. And they found this, that there were areas that they could more diligently focus, that they could provide their education to certain areas and reduce the fire risks within that area. This is a valuable lesson that we can take by utilizing good research methods in the workplace. These examples are not terribly hard to find or solve, but we need to see them more often. We need to have good data-driven research to help us inform our decisions in both the public and education fields. And that's why I'm here today, is to encourage you to do that, to encourage you to ask questions, to find those answers by searching through evidence and building an effective argument. Now, to recap, we want to be able to answer a few questions. We want to, again, ask good questions. Find good data through numbers or stories or those quantitative or qualitative methods. We use this to defend an argument, and then we finally make good decisions. And we expect others to do the same. Now, this is all I've prepared for you today, but I hope you are encouraged to go and learn more about research methods. What you can do, again, to look at information that's provided to you and systematically analyze that information in a way that makes sense and provides you with a good, solid argument. I'm thankful that I've been able to teach and work with you today, and I'm excited to be able to see how you move forward. I wish you the best of luck in your pursuit for information and in the research methods process.